Healthy perspectives lead to healthy priorities, I believe. And that leads to better decision making. I don't think you can make good decisions until you have right priorities. And I said that comes, I believe, with the right perspective. The challenges of life can be very draining. They're at least challenging. Even Jesus had times when he needed to get away. He had to go off alone in the hills or find a quiet spot at night. Sometimes his plans had to go by the way because there were so many people around him that he had to forego his plans to go away and pray or go away and have a little break because the needs were there around him. The term work-life balance is one you've probably heard an awful lot. I'm not going to particularly use that title, although I will refer to it, because I think it prioritising life's objectives is, for me, a better one. The term work-life balance, has not lost its buzz in the last few years. It's partly due to the presence of millennials in the workforce and becoming more and more. By 2025, that will be 75% of the workforce. Employers are putting in tremendous effort trying to determine the best way to appeal, to keep, to retain such workers. But the very nature of the subject has meant this has always been an issue. And it's not just an issue for employers, but an issue for everyone. Talk of work-life balance is always around as people seek to juggle their complex family life, the opportunities that were provided by technological mobility, and the 24/7 society we live in, and the personal dreams. Now, there are many aspects of that we all enjoy, and there are benefits to it. I still remember the first time I went to North America and couldn't believe that I could get coffee in the middle of the night. When over here you struggle to get decent coffee during the day, I thought, wow, what a place. I think I could live here, could just jump in the car, go down the road and grab a coffee at any time. There are things about the modern life that we all value, and yet at the same time come with it a tremendous amount of challenges. Many of people have said to me over the years, as this has come up, prioritising time, work-life balance, many people have said, including leaders and pastors, as we've discussed it, have said to me, well, we know the theory, we know what to teach, but actually we don't really know many people that actually do it, or we can't really do it. And it's a bit of a problem. People talk about it. And they talk about work-life balance. But I'm increasingly not sure that this is the correct way to talk about it. The Bible, for instance, doesn't differentiate between sacred and secular. That's something in past generations that we've done. And I'm hopeful that today's modern society, today's young people won't do that, won't separate the sacred and the secular. Well, this is sacred. This is my time when I come on Sunday morning to church. That's kind of my religious bit, and then I'll get on with the rest of my life. It's been one of the problems with people understanding Christianity, and they think that Christianity is just hatch, match, dispatch. Christianity is just coming to church at a certain time, doing certain events and going through rituals, not understanding that it's a 24/7 life choice. In fact, God chose us first before we ever responded to him, and not realising that. And so they get it wrong. They seem to understand that perhaps with a Jew or a Muslim, but they don't seem to understand that. And perhaps that's the way we've projected it. Perhaps that's the way we've evangelised. Perhaps that's the way that we've put it, or others have characterised it. But I'm not sure that's the correct thing. We're urged to do all things well for God. Colossians 3:17. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him to do everything. So some people will say balance is not relevant. It's not one thing or the other, but doing whatever task is to hand to the best of your ability. So if you're on holiday, put your phones on voicemail. Switch off email. Switch off email and let people know that you're on vacation. If you're at work, then work. Don't keep checking Facebook or calling your family. If you're with your family, then don't be checking your phone constantly. If you're at play, well, play and enjoy it. Work hard, play hard. Some people say that. There's always been this challenge. Work, life, what do we do for every generation? The baby boomers had little choice but to work hard as the world was recovering from the devastating war, and everything had to be built from the bottom up. Long hours, often mind-numbing production jobs were the price for security, which was the most valued thing after the uncertainties of life. Generation X, but maybe in response to this and seeing their parents working all hours of the night and day and not being around, valued time off more. Things like parental leave, more flexibility in the working place and greater mobility. Some of that came from improved education. In the 1960s, in this country, 5% of the population entered university. Now it's something between 40 and 45% in this country. Generation Y, the first always connected generation, 24/7. They moved from one thing to another, indeed juggling all at the same time. You know, on your phone, on your laptop, listening to music, whatever you're doing it all at the same time. Remarkable. I don't know how people do it. They live in a world of sharp contrasts. There's globalization, but personalization at the same time. So they'll be excited about finding a Starbucks because they know what Starbucks is, and they'll think, well, some will anyway. Some will go for Costa, whatever. But there are other coffee shops available, and they will go and think, oh yeah, there's a Starbucks here. We know what that is. But they'll go in and then they'll order something that nobody else have. We'll have a sort of a double skinny mocha cappuccino with shaved wood cuttings in it and whatever it might be, you know, because it's personalised. And yet it's part of the globalised brand. So there's the safety and there's the security, but there's that individuality coming. And this is normal life. You know, separating things, I think for the generation millennials, is outside the norm and seems odd. This is the generation that have lounge spaces and running coffee and ping pong tables at work. So workplace, social life are kind of interconnected. I was in Malmo a little while ago and we visited our son's office, and okay, they are computer games programmers, and but their office was not like most offices I've ever been in, and they had all these chill-out spaces and places and kitchens and all sorts of stuff in their office, and people just dropped in to visit them, and it was just, you could just see they were all kind of working differently. Everything was interconnected. You just go and spend some time in the coffee shop next door and you'll see people working and socialising and doing all at the same time in the same place. However, this life without limits, for what is the most goal-orientated generation ever, is not without its problems and its difficulties. Today, millennials are more than ever focused on building a family. And of course that's natural because they're at that age now where all generations come to, where, you know, you're making your way in work, but at the same time you've got a young family to build. And so one survey, and this was done in the States, found that they prefer a fulfilling family life rather than a fulfilling professional life. More than 3/4 would put their family, of millennials, would put their family life first. If given the choice between moving closer or further away from their families, 8 in 10 would move closer. So this struggle between imagining their lives with no limits while wanting to put down roots is beginning to take an emotional toll on millennials as well. And the majority, again, this is an American survey, 64% said that they sometimes feel stuck in the life that they have. And so all generations facing this. This is not a new issue, and it's not one that's likely to go away. So I want us to have a biblical view on this. So we're going to take a biblical view and a biblical approach to life and work. So we're going to turn to the Bible for help here, because if we want a biblical approach, if we want a spiritual perspective, the Bible's the place to begin with. Psalm 127. This is one of the most practical psalms, one of the most practical parts of the Bible. Unless the Lord builds a house, the work of the builders is wasted. Unless the Lord protects a city, guarding it with sentries will do no good. It is useless for you to work so hard from early morning until late at night, anxiously working for food to eat. For God gives rest to his loved ones, or his beloved. Children are a gift from the Lord. They are a reward from him. Children born to a young man are like arrows in a warrior's hands. How joyful is the man whose quiver is full of them. He will not be put to shame when he confronts his accusers at the city gates. One commentator, Derek Kidner, referred to Psalm 127 as singling out 3 of the most universal preoccupations: building, security, and raising a family. So what do they amount to? And what or who do we owe them? The psalm is generally ascribed to Solomon. In fact, that verse, his loved ones or beloved, is a word from which Jedediah comes from, and that's his personal name that God gave him. And when you see that, you can often think it's Solomon that's involved in that. In fact, we were talking about some literature the other day, and the writer who, has got books entitled, you can see that she obviously probably has got some sort of Christian or biblical background, because she understood the words and used those in the titles. Some see the 2 parts of this psalm, because you notice it, first 2 verses talk about building, talk about security, and then it talks about family. It talks about children and talks about family. Some see the 2 parts of this as 2 completely different things that have been merged together. But as the commentator Peake said, that's just simply a manifestation of the occupational disease of commentators, always trying to say, well, that comes from this source, that comes from that source. In actual fact, the harmony in this short psalm is clear, because in the psalm we see 2 senses of the word house. The sense as the dwelling and the sense as family are both used here. Adam Clarke, another commentator, says this: it is a fact that Ben, a son, and Bath, a daughter, and Beeth, a house, come from the same root banner, to build, because sons and daughters build up a household or constitute a family as much and as really as stones and timber constitute a building. And so the words for building here and the words for sons and daughter come from the same root. And here the psalmist is using both. There's a Latin motto, and sorry, I never studied Latin. There's 2 or 3 Latin phrases I know. I did do New Testament Greek, so that I can talk about, but so excuse me if my pronunciation is rubbish. Nice Dominus Frusta. And it comes from the first words of this psalm. And it means, the Latin first words of this psalm, it means without the Lord, frustration. And in fact, that is the motto of the city of Edinburgh. And it has been since certainly the 17th century. And it appears on the crest and the city's official documents. It could be attached to the lives of many who are trying to live their lives without the Almighty, says Boyce, James Montgomery Boyce, another commentator. Without the Lord, frustration. And that is where so many people are today. That is why this is such a big issue. James Montgomery Boyce goes on to say, if it is a vain act to build a house without God, or watch over a city without depending on God to preserve it, then it's even greater folly to try and raise a family without God. And this is what the psalmist is saying. Without God being at the heart and the centre, without everything revolving around God, whatever you build, whatever security you think you might have, whatever family you think you might have, it's all in vain. It's all useless. It's all ultimately worthless. So the last few minutes, 3 priorities here. Priority 1, let God build, with you assisting where needed. God likes labourers to work with him. We're called co-workers in the New Testament. Psalm 127 verses 1 to 2 talks of labouring in vain, of doing things without God. When we first note here the 2 things mentioned, they're both of importance and value. A well-built house and the care and protection of a community are good things, aren't they? But here we see them considered to be worthless because the task has been undertaken without God's involvement. Now, house building, we know, is a matter for architects, planners, surveyors, structural engineers and builders. So what's God got to do with it? Simple. The Bible warns against undertaking anything without God being at the centre of plans. House building can be about security, provision for our family. It's also, though, about social status and where we live, what you build with, what type and size of property. Say you live in Notting Hill and many people will be impressed. Say that same thing 40 years ago and many people will have felt sorry for you. Yeah, because the community wasn't what it is now. Having your own home can be a totally consuming project. Just buying a house is considered one of the most stressful things we do in our society. For many, it's a huge financial strain, which requires long hours to fund. So what strain does this put upon a marriage, the family, health and well-being? What cost does this building entail? It can shift your priorities. And the psalmist understood that. See, the thing about Solomon was, he comes up with some great wisdom, but he didn't really take much of it himself. He didn't really take his own advice all over. We'll see that doesn't really happen as you read through. He made all these mistakes. This is what Jesus said in part of the Sermon on the Mount, and you'll see it in the Sermon on the Plain in Luke, and you'll see it elsewhere in Jesus' teachings, but Matthew 6, 19 to 21. Do not lay up for yourself treasures upon earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Just talked about building on his words at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, the person who builds on my words, he says, is like a person who builds their house upon rock. Second priority, be secure in God. Trust him primarily. So the other picture we see here is of that of concern over the defence, the protection of the neighbourhood. Security. Now this is vital. In fact, it's probably the first big reason why people began to gather in villages and towns rather than being scattered, because they came together for security. Now, these days we perhaps don't build walls around cities, although some people may have other ideas, but more and more the wealthy people live in gated communities. Drove past a couple this morning. In fact, in this area you don't have to look far to see security patrols keeping an eye on certain neighbourhoods. But the truth is that we're only truly safe in the hands of God? How many people thought an investment was secure? How many people thought property was secure? How many people thought banks were secure? Only to find that they're not secure at all. We are only truly safe when we're in God's hands. And to do all this without God being at the centre, without God leading, without God guiding, is pointless. Trusting security devices is all in good, but do we engage God in our plans? Does not God seek to look after us? Psalm 46:1. God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. Amen? Can we say amen? Some of us can. We know what trouble is. Some people here know and have known that God has been their strength. Fearing people, Proverbs 29:25, if we want to go back to Solomon. Fearing people is a dangerous trap, but trust in the Lord means safety. The problem comes from leaving God out of our plans or adding God in a kind of token way, like, oh Lord, please bless my efforts, kind of thought. Isn't that often really what we pray and really what we do? We make our plans and our schemes, we devise things, and then we ask God to just bless it. God says, no, let me be right at the forefront of it. And third and lastly, third priority, God builds with and through family. His gifts build community. Sorry, put myself a timer on. So contrast this, what we've just looked at, with the family. The provision of children differs from that for which we toil and labour for. What men and women work for and striving for are wages, not a gift. But here we're told that children are a gift from the God. Wages are what we produce with the work of our hands. Gift are those things given by the grace of God to us. And God gives us children as a gift. They're a gift, verse 3 says, from God. They are a great reward. This is what, and this is how God builds. This is how God builds communities. This is how God's been through children. Often today, society sees children as a burden. True worth, fulfillment, satisfaction for an adult comes from work, we're told. A person is not worth anything to society unless they're out labouring. Looking after children, raising them is of little value in our society. And of course, it can't make anybody feel fulfilled. Only in work can that be achieved. A man might toil to build a house, but by giving us children, God builds our home. God says, I will build, and here are the gifts I'm going to give you to build.